Okay, so this is the period designated for a Q&A session in English. So I'm very fluent in English. I studied it at school in England. But if there's any word I can't think of, I'll ask Ajahn Jill to help me. So we don't have any English questions here so far. So maybe there's some coming. But if anybody just wants to ask, normally just put up your hand or Anjali or something, and can just for many years, so many times, I remember having conversations with Americans and English and Australian people teaching in Thailand of being frustrated that people don't ask questions like they do in England or America. And they concluded from that there's sort of a lack of interest in the topic that they were teaching. They'd be discouraged. And I said, no, you're just doing it the wrong way. You have to understand that most Thai people don't feel so comfortable in publicly asking questions in public. But they are, if you give them the opportunity to write their questions down, you get really good questions. I think better than or as good as or as better as you would get in your own country. So I always thought it's a good example of sense that the Western way is always the kind of the universal or the way everyone else should do it. But there are make adaptations to local cultures, and you can be quite surprised at the results. So I found giving school children chances, opportunity to answer questions, and really been impressed by the quality of questions. So I do this on every Wednesday. I go to Banyarpateep school, and 1 week I give a Dhamma talk, and 1 week there's a kind of Q&A session. And then there's a second Q&A session for individual students in one class every week. And the questions are really good. So so one of the questions the other day was, what makes a question a good question? This was one of the children asked. Okay, so we don't have any written Thai questions, so please go ahead. Anything at all. It could be about meditation, Buddhism in general, or absolutely anything. It's sort of we're informal, ben gan eng. Does anyone like to ask or discuss anything? Yeah.
So I'm heading to university next year, and I was, obviously there's going to be a lot of stress, and I was just wondering if you had any techniques like pertaining to Buddhism or meditation that helps deal with like stress during exams and such.
Yeah, I think there are a number of things involved, and I think the first thing is to recognize a distinction between pressure and stress. So, wherever you are and whatever stage of your studies or your career, you're always going to be in positions where there's pressure on you of one kind or another. And that's a life skill to learn, isn't it? How to deal with pressure. So when you haven't really trained your mind, then pressure almost inevitably leads to stress until they sort of think there's one and the same thing. But I think it's possible to deal with a lot of pressure even from different directions and not be stressed out. And so the stress has come really from thinking, doesn't it? It's just thinking about the pressures rather than the actual work itself, which at the end of the day, it's just one step at a time. Whatever you think about it, that's what you're left with because you have no choice. So recognizing stress-producing productive thoughts as they arise in your mind, and neither following them nor repressing them, just recognizing them and allowing them. This is how you develop a very good mental habit, and that deals with stress, anxiety, so many other negative mental states which really become extreme because of the tendency of the mind just to go round and round and round and round in things that are as yet have no resolution. But so that's the kind of the internal Buddhist practice, and it's not anything really mystical. It means making an investment of time to develop that kind of mindfulness muscle which you can call upon, because you have to have that sharpness, and you have to have that facility with just knowing what's going on in your body and mind moment by moment, and not just sort of getting caught up with things. But the other more mundane element of it is just things like time management. So what I see in a lot of students is that they get stressed out because they leave everything to the last moment, and not really planning out their workload well enough. So it's sort of external mundane things like time management together with this like internal development of mindfulness and dealing with stress-producing thoughts. If you can also observe, tend to be kind of patterns of thinking, that you tend to fall into particular ruts. And so if you can recognize those particular ruts or those particular patterns, then you can get, that helps to be really sharp when they're just starting to arise in your mind. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
If I may,
Could you take your mask so I can hear more clearly? Yeah. 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 Can you use the microphone? Yeah.
If I may, I would like to ask, what would you have done if you haven't become a monk?
What would I have done? It's so hard to think about that now, because I'm 65 and I wanted to be a monk since I was like 18, so I can hardly even remember anything before I either wanted to be a monk or became a monk. But I'll tell you my work experience. I worked in a warehouse. After I finished my A-levels, I just didn't want to use my brain anymore. I just wanted to use my body. So I worked in a warehouse, just sort of lifting boxes onto piles of boxes, and I really enjoyed it. And then I worked on a building site, so I was making some money. Then I worked on a farm. My idea, one idea I had was to be like a cattle herder or a sheep herder, because in Switzerland, so I actually sort of pursued this, went up into the mountains, but I didn't really have the language skill, because it's the idea you just go up into the mountains and the cattle can sort of feed the cattle twice a day, and then you have the rest of the day for meditation. But also when I was a student, I very much liked the novels of Jack Kerouac. I don't know if anybody's read any Jack Kerouac. It's like a beat, sort of cool guy in the 1950s. And so he had a friend, he's actually based on a real life figure who was a great Zen practitioner and poet afterwards, called Gary Snyder. But in America in those days, you could get a job as like a they helicopter you in, and then you go up to this little cabin up high up on a sort of a platform, and then you just watch out for fires. So that's your job. You're a fire watcher in a national park. And I thought that's a really good thing to do. You can just read and meditate and just sort of make sure there's no fires. And then the other so I really thought I'd like to do is one of the really books that really influenced me as a teenager was called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. So maybe some of you, anybody read that book, Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha? Okay, so we're going back a long time ago now. But it's a fantastic book. They made a movie out of it also. You can watch the movie. And so it's about this young man who's belongs to some kind of ascetic group. And then he decides to leave and to explore the world. He feels he's got enough kind of spiritual strength to deal with all the temptations of the world. In the beginning, he does. And then he gets caught up in the world and making money and family. And then finally, he sort of comes to his senses and leaves his home for a second time. And he becomes a disciple of this spiritual teacher who has a boat which he rows backwards and forwards across the river, taking pilgrims to who are going on this holy route. And yeah, so that was the other livelihood. I thought, yeah, just something completely blameless and like Boon, just rowing people across a river to a place where they need to go. So those are the kinds of, I don't know whether I would have ever really pursued them. I think I could have been an undertaker. I've done quite a lot of work in funerals and preparing dead bodies and things like that, and kind of something of a gift for that. So maybe I could have gone into yeah, I don't really know. But, I'm just really happy I found this way of life. Anybody else? Yes, at the back there.
Well, I kind of curious about like how you define the word of understanding yourself. When I read a book, like people say, okay, you're born with something that you have to do, but there's an inner voice or inner voice in your head, like to kind of force you to like do something. Not forcing like that, but I mean like there's a purpose of like when we were born, we have to like doing something, but I don't know like is it a concrete concept to
Yeah, I wouldn't completely agree with that. I think certainly, given the fact that this isn't the first time we've been born. This is just one. Just one episode of a very long soap opera, but given the fact that you do have karmic, both good and bad karma that you've created in the past creates certain kind of tendencies and potentials. So I think the way that we look at karma is like it's like potential. You can sometimes, you can see this with like child prodigies, like math prodigies or musical prodigies. Obviously this is something that comes from past lives. But I don't agree with the kind of common modern idea that everyone has some kind of thing they have to do in their life, and then they have to search for this kind of great passion in their life and follow that and follow their dream. And I think I kind of find that kind of facile. And I think it really creates a lot of unnecessary suffering. I've seen many teenagers particularly feeling inadequate. What's wrong with me? I don't have a passion. I should have a passion. How can I find my passion? And it's like, something, a real personality defect. And I said, why? First of all, people who have great passion, before they even really commit themselves to something, it's very rare, I would say, from my experience. And the other thing is that in many cases, passion comes as the result of committing yourself to something, rather than having to have it before you start. Because when you really apply yourself to something and you find, oh yeah, I'm quite good at this and I can do this and I enjoy doing it, and as time goes on, you find this real passion for it coming. But the idea that you have to find the passion first before you really commit yourself to anything in life, that's not something I would agree with. And I think we have so many different potentials, and as a Buddhist, the number one potential is potential for liberation. And that's why being born in the human realm is considered, great good fortune, because we can develop spiritually in this realm in a way which is very difficult or impossible in other realms. So having this sort of ethical, moral, spiritual liberation as a sort of a guiding light, and then, as in what way you learn, you make your living or you follow, then that's something that should try to make that in harmony with your life goals in terms of, your spiritual development. So I think that sometimes there's too much emphasis on the career side, and then maybe people are often 40 years old or something before they wake up to the spiritual dimension of life. And I think that it's not emphasizing the spiritual dimension in preference or over the academic or the career goals, but finding a way to find some harmony between them.
I'm wondering because I've been Hello. If I may ask, I've been taught that in Buddhism, our bodies, our consciousnesses are not our own. We're made up of the 5 aggregates. But I'm wondering, when we say that our good or bad karma is attributed to ourselves, what do we mean by ourselves? And is our thought or our action a product of the 5 aggregates, or are they something entirely different?
Well, the 5 aggregates is a scheme by which which is meant to enable us to investigate our life, our body and mind. So there are categories and ways, just like different focuses of the of contemplation and understanding. As we tend to think there's this kind of solid, independent me standing behind experience, and so using teachings like the 5 khandhas or the 4 elements, these are ways of kind of deconstructing the assumptions that we make about our lives and looking more clearly about what's really there. So in any endeavor, when we're looking at cause and effect, how do we produce an effect? And I think particularly clear in meditation or spiritual life, that there's always a factor X which we cannot put any number on. We can't quantify it, which is the karma from our past lives, the inheritance we have from past lives. So we can if we want to talk about that in a scientific way, we talk about heredity and environment. How important is it your genes? How important are your genes, and how important are your environment? So there's been a long debate about this for a long time, 100 years or more. And generally, I think the consensus now is about 50-50. So what you bring with you through your genes, and then 50% is what you do with that, or the conditions, the experiences you have in your life. With regard to the karma, then you can't sort of point to it in the five khandhas in that way, although it will manifest as that. So for instance, let's say you have your karma is you have a potential, or there's a high likelihood that you will let's say find a life in which you can help other people, let's say, because you've done all the good things in the past, and so you find drawn to ways of living your life that you can help other people. So we say that's a karmic thing, but you have to apply yourself to that as well, and develop the skills to help other people, and put yourself in a situation where you can do that. So all those skills and the mental states and the understanding, that's not something that's there all the time, but you have a potential for it. So we can look at the karma as sort of potentialities. Like with genes was also, there was this idea that somehow genes are destiny. Once you work out the genome, then you know exactly what. And they found out that wasn't the case. And with genes, it's almost like there's an on-off switch. You have a gene that maybe makes you susceptible to a particular kind of cancer, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get that kind of cancer. For instance, if depending on how you live your life, depending on how you look after your mind, that switch may never get pressed. So again, genes and karma, I think they have this kind of parallel kind of functions, that they are potentials but not destiny. They're not like this is definitely going to happen.
กราบนมัสการท่านพระอาจารย์ค่ะ I'm wondering, is it possible to listen to music without losing sati?
To live in, sorry?
Listen to music without losing sati, or when we allow our emotions or feelings to be swayed by music, does it mean that we lose awareness or sati? Because maybe when we take in art visually, I feel like we have a distance that we can be aware of what we're taking in, but I don't know about music, or when sometimes we can say that we lose ourselves in music.
Well, yeah, I guess like music is a very broad category, isn't it? And there are very different kinds of music. Yeah, well, the first point I would make is that in Dhamma practice, like the first big goal is we call stream entry. It's like the 4 levels of enlightenment. And the first level is called stream entry. And that's really the crucial one. And the Buddha gave this simile. He said, if all the suffering that you've experienced in past lives was compared to earth, it would be like all the earth in the world would be like the suffering that you've experienced in the past. But if you reach stream entry, the suffering that remains is like the amount of dirt you could get under your fingernail. So it means like 99.999% of suffering is over once you realize this level. And that level is the first level will inevitably lead to the 4th and final level within 7 lifetimes. is why it's entering the stream, because now you're on the stream to Nibbana. Now, one of the reasons why this first level of enlightenment is so important is that many householders, over past huge number of householders, keeping 5 precepts, have realized this this level. So if listening to music meant that you couldn't develop in Dhamma, and it was like a major obstacle or serious obstacle, the Buddha would have included it within the 5 precepts, because the 5 precepts is the basic standard. But you'll observe when you go on retreat, usually, I mean, most retreats we go on to 8 precepts. And so the extra precepts are not anything to do with ethics and good and bad. You know, there's things like not eating in the evening, not putting on makeup, not listening to music, all these kinds of things. So they're all kind of the extra unessential parts of life. So you just want to simplify and get round just down to looking at your body and mind. So lay householders will do this. So maybe on every one every uposatha, 4 times a month, 2 times a month, or they'll go on meditation retreats, and that's when you put all those things aside and you really focus on Dhamma practice. But I would say for a householder, listening to music is not, a serious obstacle, and it's just part of, one of the permissible enjoyments of life. But as with anything, you need to know what's the right amount, and not, if at any time you get stressed out and you have this kind of automatic go-to, for some people it might be going online and buying something. Somebody else would be taking alcohol or a drug, or somebody else might be music. Music is superior to those, but it's if it's a means of just sort of getting away from your present situation, then it's not such a good habit. But if it's just something that you enjoy, and I know people who work in music therapy, for instance, and can use music to help people a lot, or to using music, traditional Thai music with the elderly is also a good thing that people are developing. Again, I think there's music and music. There's some of the classical music, like Eastern classical music, there are Buddhist influenced or meditation influenced music can be very good way to calm the mind down before beginning meditation. Even there's sitar music. I used to like, as a layman, sitar music, Indian sitar music, because it just feels so organic and natural. And it's just like you're listening to some kind of natural rhythms, like in the forest. So observing what music does to you, if it really stirs you up or is relaxing, or and recognizing, that's one part of life. So short answer, I'm not sure. You maybe lose mindfulness a little bit if you're taking a high standard of mindfulness, but not seriously enough to be an obstacle to spiritual progress. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on change. Change in terms of change of personality, change of behavior, change of mindset. I'm a believer that change can be beneficial to someone. I think it adds more depth to one's character, for better or for worse. I think it also adds a new range of experiences to someone's life that can make it more fulfilling. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, it's a huge topic, because Buddhism is basically the study of change and understanding change. So that's probably too broad and profound a topic to deal with right now. But just a couple of thoughts I would give you. You see that there tend to be two kind of extreme reactions to change. One is like conservatism and holding on to old things for their own sake because they give you a sense of stability, and then people who really attach to that feel very threatened by and angry about change because it's like threatening their whole stability and their whole sense of who they are. And the other extreme is like change for change's sake. It's like something is new, it must necessarily be superior to something which is old. This idea of being modern and being up to date and sometimes really good things the reason why some things have been around for a long time is because they're really good things, and they've been tried and tested over centuries. And the idea that because it's old, therefore throw it out to get the 21st century or the modern age. So that's a bit foolish. And these days there seem to be like this you get these kind of fashions. The latest one is like innovation. It's got to innovate. But what does innovate mean? I mean, just do something in a different way, doesn't it? But whether it's a better way or a worse way, that's something that really have to think through. Because when you change something, there are all kinds of like stresses and retraining or recalibration, all kinds of costs to innovation, and so quite often then they outweigh the pros. But just this idea that everything should look to innovate. Some you look that because there's a class of things, aren't they, that we can never come up with a better way than that. Example like spoon. Okay, I don't think we need to innovate spoons. I mean, spoons does a really good job. You get something and you put it in your mouth. And I mean, how can you innovate on that? So that's just one. So there's obviously a class of things that are well designed, and as long as human beings have mouths like this and still have to eat food, there's no need to innovate spoons, is there? Or always think that, wow, yeah, actually, we could design a spoon and you could tip it in your ear maybe and then allow the fluid to fall down into your mouth. Wow, that'd be cool, And then maybe you could have designed special napkins to mop up the mess and have a whole package. But sometimes some of the innovation in the world is as ridiculous as that, I think. So I think change is an opportunity, to every now and again to just come out of what you're used to. Like when I was 15, I went on a trip with some friends, most of them older, and we rented a minibus and we drove from England to Morocco in the summer holidays. And for me, as a 15-year-old boy, lived in like a small town in England, just to see a whole new culture, whole new language. And I'm very, very wordy. So seeing signs and in word letters I couldn't understand, this really kind of weird and disturbing for me. And so I really learned something important from that experience, because I realized that all the things I sort of taken for granted growing up in England, these were just the ways that people on a little island in the northwest corner of Europe did things, and how could I be sure that the way they did things and the things they believed were any superior to the way that people did things in Northern Africa or their beliefs? So that was really awakening, sort of experience for me. And I had the idea that the more things you see and the more experiences you have, the more you learn. And then so I traveled a lot between ages 17 and 20, all over the world, and and I met a lot of people who'd been traveling and having all kinds of exotic experiences, and yet at a certain period, people just shut down. They develop a certain set of beliefs and frameworks for their experience, and then everything sort of fits into that, and they stop learning from change and from their experience. So it seemed to me this is a really important quality to cultivate in your life, that curiosity and interest and sensitivity and openness to things. Well, without that, even if you have all these kinds of exotic experiences, that they don't really have much value for you individually. Anything else? I've got one or two. Yes, somebody.
Namaskar, พระอาจารย์ครับ First things first, I'm a big fan of you. Right, and second of all, I've been doing research on aging. So to make people healthier, maybe they live longer, or ultimately being immortal. But one of the incarnation in this book here saying that I'm of the nature to age, I'm not gone beyond aging. So does this mean that I should stop and people should stop? Because we have been doing this for like 20 years or even longer, maybe hundreds of years, to find the immortality cure. So what's your suggestion?
Well, I think working to increase the quality of life of elderly people, that's something really worth. But I think that's the key term, the quality as opposed to quantity. Because often people think they're just sort of living longer is a good in itself. So I wouldn't necessarily say that, because you've probably seen yourself people in the last stage of their life and being kept alive with technology and really suffering a lot, simply to add a few more days to your life, and to say, well, for what really? For what purpose? I think it's possible now. We're seeing the average median age it's increased a lot, even in my lifetime. So now you've got people who are 80, 90 years old, even 100 years old. Ajahn Pasano, a friend of mine who was abbot at Wat Nanachat before me, his mother just celebrated her 100th birthday and have a big party, and she's there, and she's it's more and more normal. I think that it's possible that may be able to extend life expectancy probably to, I would say, maximum of 120. I think it's probably maximum. But then again, it's like, what for? I often say to people when monks give blessing, say ayut wano, so may you have a long life. But when you wish someone a long life, actually you're wishing, may you be an old person for a long time. Because that's what it really means, isn't it? It doesn't sound such a, may you be an old person for a really long time. It's like, oh, thank you. So yeah, I think finding ways to extend people's lives is, if the emphasis is on quality, but also just recognizing, big picture of things. You live an extra 5 years or 10 years. In terms of samsara and millions of lifetimes, it's not such a big deal. But we're entering a period now where bigger and bigger proportion of our population are elderly, and working together to increase expectation, particularly in quality of life. I think that's really important work to do. I got a couple of written questions. Okay, how to calm down when people get mad with me? Okay. Well, in any kind of stressful situation, like when someone's shouting at you or when someone's really angry with you, the first thing to do is come back to your body. That's just number one. Come back to body awareness. Just breathe in, breathe out, like I was teaching, because one of the reasons why the breath is such an interesting object of study is because the breath is that part of the body which is so intimately connected with the mind. So if your mind is very agitated, your breath's agitated. If your mind's calm, your breath's calm, and so on. So when you're agitated, your breathing will become short and irregular. So first things first, breathe deep, breathe in, breathe out, and just feel the whole body from your head down to your toes. And as you feel there's a stress and tension, just feel it like draining down into the earth through your feet. Just breathe as you breathe out. Let it go down into your feet. Depends who's angry with you, also, isn't it? I mean, if it's like mum or dad or something, sometimes you just have to just sit there or stand there and be patient. If it's friend or boyfriend or girlfriend, then maybe it's it's a time where you just say, look, maybe we could just take 5 minutes here and come back and talk with this when we're both a little bit calmer. So taking time out when you're both getting upset, agitated. Not giving the impression you're trying to run away. You're saying, look, I really do ready to talk about this, but I don't think this is really the right time now. Let's just take a break and come back to talk about this. In terms of the sort of principles of good communication and in times of strong emotion, then always start off with you, and don't start telling people you are this, you are that kind of person, you're always like this, you're never like that. So those when you're having difficult conversations, this point of mindfulness, never use the word always or never. If you tell somebody you always do something, immediately their mind's like supercomputer fast. If they can find just one example where that's not true, then they'll feel like noijai, you're not being fair to them. Or if you say you never, then they'll find just one example of when they did, and then they're in the right again. You see, so you say talk about things that you can, specific things that you've seen or you've heard or you've experienced, and how you felt about those things. And so you're giving information to the other person and trying, but the moment you start assuming that you know that person, you know their thoughts and you know their intentions, then there's no real communication going to take place. So when someone is really angry with you, then sometimes, well, you've done something wrong, so there's cause and effect there, isn't it? But even if somebody is being unfair, angry about something which is not the case, then remember that person is really angry with their idea of who you are. Nobody knows who you are really, and all of the subtleties and the inner workings of your mind. But someone has, if it's not a simple dispute over something you've done, but it's about perceptions and so on, then this is a good reflection that this person has a distorted understanding of who you are, and they're angry with that distorted understanding rather than they're angry with who you are. So if you can, there are various ways of dealing with this and thinking about it. But first aid, kind of dealing with it immediate, is just breathe normally, and just imagine the stress going down into the ground. That's a good way to start. So. It seems like so many people demand so much attention from me, but it is never the other way round. Why do I feel so guilty about it, and how can I feel less bad? Well, there's a very sort of old word you probably all know, and people don't use it so much these days. And in Thai, is "na jitang." We're all different. We're all different. We don't have to be the same as anybody else, but we also don't have to sort of make a big point of being different from everybody else. Well, yeah, we're just who we are. We're like this right now, and we're changing. We're changing. They're changing. This is the insight of Buddha. It's like there's nothing fixed within us at all. Everything is the product of habit and repetition. And if you have some negative quality in your mind, well, then find the causes and conditions of it and stop feeding them. If you want to develop a good quality, it's not beyond you. You have the potential to do that, but you have to be systematic, and you have to develop it patiently over a long period of time. So, I'm not quite sure about. So people are asking a lot from you. Well, do you find that oppressive? Do you find that too much? Do you find it difficult to say no? Now then, those are things to work on, creating boundaries for yourself. Now we all need those kind of boundaries. We can't, just as we can't or shouldn't just live for ourselves, we can't just live for other people either. And this is, I think, important life skill to learn how to find that balance between your own welfare and contributing to your family and to your community and to the society at large. That's a really important thing to learn as a human being, isn't it? Feeling guilty, then, I have a whole kind of theory about this, because there are, let's say from anthropological point of view, they sometimes divide cultures into shame cultures and guilt cultures. So the West are definitely guilt cultures, and Thailand and Asia generally shame cultures. But now over the past 10, 20 years, more and more Western influence, then sort of more and more Thai people have fallen foul of this guilty illness, this kind of sad state of mind. So what's the difference between guilt and shame? Well, there are different ways of explaining these terms, but this is my understanding. When you've done something, said something bad, foolish in the past, how do you process that, and how do you deal with that? So the Western way, influenced by teachings of Christianity in particular and the Abrahamic religions, says that you are a bad person. And this is ultimately just deeply, you are fallen, you are sinful, you're a bad person. So when you act, you're just acting upon this badness. And people feel bad. In short, the idea is, I did this, I did that, I am a bad person. So the contrast in the Buddhist point of view is that looking at a bad action, recognize it, take responsibility for it, but to understand it as a function of the situation and the mental states that prevailed when that action was performed. For instance, let's say we look back at something that we did which is we really regret now, and we say, well, at that moment that I did that thing, I just had so little mindfulness, so little patience, so little compassion, and so much anger, and so much greed, so much jealousy, and so on. And then you say, well, how could it be any otherwise? The power of these negative qualities was so strong, and the power of the kusala dhammas, the positive qualities, was so weak. Then, what else could have happened? But the lesson that we take from that is, I really need to find a way to reduce the amount of greed and anger and jealousy and so on in my mind. I really need to find a way to increase the amount of mindfulness and kindness and wisdom in my mind, so that if I'm in that situation again, I will not make the same mistake. So in the guilty framework, you have this idea of a self who is bad, and is bad because of the things it does. Whereas in the shame, we call it hiriotapa view, then we have actions that are performed with a mind which has been influenced or dominated by defilement, and that is something that we need to deal with. So I was thinking, like, guilt tends to be like toxic, it's like leads to a lot of mental health problems, whereas shame, as I've explaining it, actually leads to growth and spiritual development. Okay, I think okay, we've got to have to leave some of these to next time, I think. Maybe we'll just carry on this morning, and so we don't have very long together. So this is a kind of meditation question anyway. How do you let go of a recurring thought, a memory you want to leave in the past? So returning to something I mentioned before, there tend to be two like knee-jerk reactions to things that happen, in whether it's outside or inside. One, with a mental state or a memory or a thought, is, I don't want this get away, go away, and try and get rid of it. And so you may try to get rid of it just by making yourself busy. When somebody's loses someone they love, that's often they want to just don't give yourself a minute's thought. Just be busy, or else use alcohol or use drugs just to take you away from that. So obviously that's not a very healthy, and it doesn't work because you're actually feeding it. You're giving it that memory even more strength by reacting to it in that way. The other extreme is just to indulge in it and just to be thinking over and over and over and over and over again. And again, each time you do that, you feed it. So the path of mindfulness is that you have that awareness, you cultivate that awareness, that when this thought just begins to arise in your mind, you're alert to it. And you just look at it. So you resist the temptation just to follow it or to hold it down and push it away and kind of destroy it. And you just look at it like that. It's that much. That's what it is. It's just this. And then when you don't feed it, either with liking or disliking, it passes away. It doesn't pass away forever. It comes back. But every time that you're sharp enough to be there and just allow it to be there until it passes away, it becomes weaker. And it becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, and eventually it disappears. So you have to be very patient, and you have to be very diligent in doing this again and again and again. But this is the very best way of dealing with those kinds of anxieties and memories and thoughts, like traumatic thoughts of some kind or another. Is it okay to say no sometime? Well, yes, absolutely. I should hope so, yes. Otherwise, you'll be a really dangerous situation, you know. So, again, you know, looking at that difficulty in saying no, where does that come from? Why is it so difficult? And sometimes it's just say personality since you were a kid. Sometimes it's just like really wanting to please people and not wanting to hurt people's feelings. So that can be quite wholesome in some way, not wanting to make somebody feel uncomfortable, unpleasant, or disappointed. But it also can become a bit neurotic, where your idea of your worth as a human being is too tied up in what other people think of you, and so you end up saying yes to things that you really don't want to be involved in, simply out of a fear of being disliked or made fun of, or losing someone's friendship. So those are big things in life, aren't they? So it's understandable. As a kind of a tip, my personality I've also find difficult to say no when people ask and make demands on me. But I found that when you have very clearly defined boundaries, it makes it a lot easier. For example, when I came to live here in the hermitage at the back of this, so I have a lot of people invite me to do a lot of different all good things, and all, both here in Thailand and overseas. And if I was to accept every invitation, I'd never spend any time here at all. So my answer to that was to make a determination that in 1 year I have to spend at least 300 nights here in this place. And so any invitations that require overnight stay that can have to be within 65 days in a year that are left. And so with that, it gave me, I found I could say no much more easily. I said, well, it's a really good thing, and yes, I really want to support you in this, but I have my quota. I have my determination. So when you say no, if it's just like, I don't want to, or I don't feel like it right now, people are going to push you some more, or else maybe they're going to feel noijai or whatever. But when you're doing it from a principle, well, look, I've made a commitment to do so many hours on my project, and I'm not going to be able to fulfill those hours if I go out tonight. So sorry, I'd love to go, but I can't. So it's saying no with some principle involved. That's the way that I deal with it. So what are the important ingredients of having pure 5 sila for the rest of human life? Wow, great question. Thank you. Yes, there's a lot to say about sila. Again, the influence of Western ideas about morality and ethics are so strong that Buddhist understanding is often distorted. So if you have like a belief system religion, like I was talking about last night, well, where does ethics come from? Where does your idea what's right, what's wrong, what you should do, what you shouldn't do? Well, it's in your book. And these are the commands of your God. And they're usually backed up with a reward and punishment system whereby if you do the things that the deity or the God wants you to do, you'll get a reward. And if you don't, you'll get punished. So this idea of commands enforced through rewards and punishment, carrot and stick, that's the kind of Western idea of morality. Not, of course, there are different views, but this is the mainstream. So in an education system kind of religion, then how do we decide what's right, what's wrong, what should be done, shouldn't be done? Do we look on Buddha as like God who just tells us, do this, don't do that? Are the 5 precepts 5 commandments? Or no, they're not, because these are, you can see this from the way in which they are translated. Let's say you take first precept, it's like say, I undertake the precept of not killing or not harming. So you undertake something, and here the important point is it has to be voluntary. So sila in Buddhism has to be voluntary. If you're just, say, not killing somebody because you're afraid of going to jail, or you don't steal because you're afraid someone's going to cut your hand off, then you would be behaving in a good way, but it wouldn't be sila in the Buddhist sense because it's not coming from the right motivation. So sila is motivation is central to sila. You have to see the value of keeping each precept very clearly, and you have to see the suffering and the pain and the difficulties and problems that would come from not keeping that precept. So that's how precepts become really strong and firm, because you really see how they contribute to living the kind of life you want to live, and in creating and sustaining the kind of communities that you want to live in. So we start off in Buddhism not from belief in ultimate principles, but observation. Buddha wants us to observe. And so one of the observations we need is, what is the sort of the bottom line? We can say, for anyone to have any kind of happiness in life, what do you need before anything else? Before you can have any kind of hope of happiness in life? Well, we say the four requisites you need. Well, you need adequate food, shelter, clothing, medicine in times of sickness. Anything else? Yes, you need to feel safe, don't you? Safety is an underlying value that all healthy societies need to sustain. So even if you were, let's say you had like the private phone number of an arahant, and you could get like one-on-one advice on your spiritual life 24 hours a day, but you're living in a place in which you feel fundamentally unsafe. You don't dare walk out the door, or every time someone you love's gone out the door, you're you're not sure whether they'll be able to come back again. I don't think your meditation will be very good, because without a foundational sense of safety, we're not prepared. We don't dare to let go of anything. When we're unsafe, we're just holding onto everything very tight. But to let go of things, you have to feel that kind of safety and relaxation. So it's very much connected with meditation and other areas of our life. So given the fact that everybody has defilements, has greed, has anger and delusion of various kinds, then what would be the means, the mechanism by which we can create families and communities where everybody feels fundamentally safe? And the Buddhist answer is when people voluntarily take on the 5 precepts. Because you're not saying you don't have any greed, anger, you're still, those are like works in progress. You're trying to deal with those things. But in the meantime, short term, you make these commitments to the people around you that even when you're angry, you won't abuse anyone physically or verbally. Even if you're really greedy and you see something you really want, you won't take anything that doesn't belong to you. Even if occasionally you might see another man or another woman other than your partner and feel some sexual desire for them, you won't follow up on it. You can't prevent yourself from having angry thoughts or greedy thoughts or lustful thoughts. Those are just part of nature. But you can make a commitment not to act upon them. And this is the foundation of sila, where you're saying this is how you make everybody around you feel safe. And so you give that sense of you hai kwam sabai jai with everybody around you by taking his precepts. You become trustworthy. And in relationships, trust is so important, isn't it? And where does trust come if not from sila? So safety, trust, and a warm and friendly, kind atmosphere, these are all underpinned by commitment to 5 precepts. And the 5 precepts also act as meditation objects. So in daily life, when so much going on, it's not like sitting in a meditation retreat center. How do you keep your values in mind? What are you mindful of? Well, you're mindful of, I will not abuse anybody physically or verbally. I won't take anything that doesn't belong to me. I won't lie. I won't take drink, drugs. And that's how you safeguard yourself and maintain a sort of self-respect. And when you keep precepts, it's difficult. There's a lot of challenges. But if you can do it consistently over a period of time, this sense of self-esteem and self-respect just comes naturally. And you start to like yourself a lot more. You really kind of find you're like a friend to yourself. You don't feel you always need to get away from yourself and go somewhere and be with someone. You can just be content with yourself because you kind of recognize you're a good person. You can maintain standards even when things around you are not supportive. So this is why sila provides a foundation for samadhi and panya, because you're not acting and speaking in ways that are causing internal agitation and guilt and shame and all these things. But you're acting in ways which you can feel proud of, and you can sort of feel this sense of self-respect. Okay, we were going to have a longer meditation, but let's just sit for a few minutes before we end the session.